Welcome, welcome. I am Dan Kalish, and I'm here to talk to you through our mentorship mini-series about why weight loss stalls and what you can do about it. Mitochondrial health, metabolic health, healing. We're going to focus a lot on organic acids. And before I get to that, I'm just going to mention that this is our 20th year anniversary. Right now, 2026, I started this training program, this Kalish method mentorship class in 2006. Major milestone. We've trained over 10,000 doctors. I'm not making that number up. We did the math. I was like, am I that old? How did all this time go by? I don't know. But we've been around for a while. And what I'm learning now is what actually we're doing. And I can tell you, because I learned this morning in class, we're teaching people how to think and work clinically. There was this doctor in class. It was a beautiful moment. It almost makes me want to cry. And she was talking about the hypometabolic pattern in her patient. And we're going to talk about this in this class in a minute too, very extensively. What is hypometabolic? Because that is, by definition, a stalled metabolism, right? And she's presenting this case, and she's like, this person is hypometabolic. And then the doctor's like, and I designed this whole program, and she's been taking this for a little while. She's getting better. And then I thought maybe I should work on detoxification. And I went and I looked at all the detoxification protocols that we have in the course. And I thought, wait a minute, she's already doing all the detox products. That's actually part of the mitochondrial repair program. And it was this aha moment of the lights going on and seeing that connection, which is the exact connection we're about to talk about today, between metabolic health and environmental toxins. And when you see a doctor get it like that, the rest of their life, they're going to fully understand exactly what's happening. We had another moment like that in class this morning also, where there was a doctor who presented a case with Giardia, and she cleared the Giardia, retested, and then there was a really bad yeast or fungal overgrowth. And I was like, hey, that's pretty common. In fact, it happens so often that we try to treat the yeast even before it gets started. And then there was another doctor on the same call, and she's like, put her hand up. She's like, I had that problem too. I had Giardia myself. I treated my Giardia and my yeast got worse. And so there are these aha moments that happen when clinicians really get it. And that's what keeps me excited in year 20 of teaching this work. Because when I see a doctor get that fact, that reality, clinical reality, that after Giardia treatments, you have to anticipate a yeast overgrowth or you're going to be in serious trouble. And that when you see a hypometabolic pattern, when you see mitochondrial damage, you have to assume and look for and figure out the environmental toxin component. When this thinking process happens in class, and I know that rest of that person's career, they're going to have that capacity to understand and to apply these principles. It is not about looking at an algorithm and figuring out, oh, this lab marker means that. It really isn't. It's about working clinically, working smart, being able to put things together that are going to make you super successful, because every patient is different. And if you're working off an algorithm, good luck. Good luck. That's just not how human beings work. It would be like having an algorithm for your marriage. If you're married or if you have a child, can you imagine if you had an algorithm for how you treat your child? Okay, baby grabs hot stove. What do I do? That's not how it works. You run, you grab the kid, you pull him away from the stove. If you're in an intimate relationship with a partner and that person says something to you and it hits you in a funny way, what are you going to go like AI that and figure out what to say back? No. And patient practice is the same as human to human contact. And that's really what we're trying to teach at Kalish Institute. And it's very satisfying to me to see that 20 years on, we're still able to line up doctors, teach them how to do this work and get them out there so you guys can be really effective in your practices. So anyways, we got a lot going on for our 20th year anniversary. Keep an eye out on your emails. We have our longevity certification. We have our mentorship program, which we're going to talk about tonight. We have our level 1 course. We have a lot of things happening this year and a lot of new teachers that we're bringing in as well. And so keep your eye on the email. You'll see all that information. And then today is like the kickoff, new year, 20-year anniversary kickoff day. So I'm kind of a little extra stoked to be doing this. And the topic for today is why do people just not lose weight sometimes, even though they're doing all the things that they should? they're eating properly, they're exercising properly. Why would it be that calories in and calories out is not making any sense, even a little bit? How does the slowdown of the metabolic function of mitochondria, how does that impact our ability to burn fat and to make energy? And how can those mitochondria get messed up in the first place? How do you see that on the lab? And then how do you start to fix that? So again, reflecting back on these earlier classes I taught this morning in the mentorship, where we have these, practitioners learning how to do this, I want to give you kind of an inside look at that experience today as a little taste of what you could do if you join the mentorship, and realize that, for the mentorship version of this, we're talking about, 4 hours a week of live calls. We're talking about this massive curriculum that you go through. You're looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lab examples, lab cases throughout the year. And at the end of that year, when I talk to the graduates, they're ready to go. They're ready to interpret. They're ready to get in there and do the critical thinking that they need to do. And it's not because I taught them that pyroglutamic acid is a marker for low glutathione. I mean, you could figure that out just by typing in pyroglutamic acid, what's it for? It's about how to apply it in a real world situation where you're dealing with human beings. That's the tricky part about all this stuff. Okay, so I am, if you haven't figured it out by now, Dan Kalish, trained with thousands of people. We've worked with Mayo Clinic. We've worked with lots of top lab people all throughout the world. I've been in practice for, let's just call it over 30 years at this point, more than 30 years. Here's the certification program that we want you to sign up for. It's starting January the 12th. There's still a few spots left. We have a 20th anniversary special, which is a rather large discount. Yahoo, 20 years I've been doing this. You get $2,700 off, which is a wonderful number. Wonderful number, isn't it? Because 2 + 7 is 9 and all that kind of numerology type stuff. So take a picture of this if you want, or look at the QR code if you're more interested in taking this class. And I'll come back and talk about this in more detail in a little bit, okay? So first of all, let's talk about what we're gonna get into on the clinical side. And then I have 2 lab reports that I pulled that we're gonna look at once we get through the slides. So there's a lab that I pulled from a DSL lab. It's their organic acids profile. And then I got a Genova metabolomics test. So we can look at 2 different cases once we go through the basics. And I'm going to go through the slides pretty quickly because I'm always anxious to get to the labs and have you guys see how that works. Now, if you were in the mentorship, what would be happening is you would be listening to these lectures pre-recorded that are posted online, and then you would be coming to class with your own labs, submitting them, and then either myself or one of our faculty would be going over that lab with you, and then you would know what to do, basically. So now, key points. I don't think it's a mystery. You just go to any airport in the United States. It's pretty clear that almost everybody is, overweight or obese now. I mean, you don't need a research study to show that. You just look around you. And we can also see that there's a pretty big environmental toxin problem that's directly related to the obesity epidemic. And what's in the crosshairs of the toxins that's causing the obesity is the health and function of your mitochondria. And that's going to be then linked to the capacity to support your detox pathways, because you got to get the environmental toxins out so your mitochondria don't get damaged, so you don't have all this extra body fat that you can't deal with. And separately from that, of course, you got to test and correct the adrenals and the thyroid. We're just looking at one core component of weight loss resistance right now, but certainly not the only one. Okay, but this is one that's missed a lot. And if you miss this one, the person's not going to get better. And this is probably the most common reason why weight loss stalls that people miss. And, I mean, it's kind of obvious to be able to say, hey, you just need to exercise more or eat better. I don't think we need to talk about that in a special webinar. This is for like when that's not working. So where do you even start? Well, if we're starting with mitochondria, we're going to do a little math and we're going to understand a little bit about the mitochondria and their function and where they reside. And for our purposes, we're thinking about the mitochondria as they reside in skeletal muscle. So we're thinking of muscle, skeletal muscle, as the key metabolic organ. That's what's determining all of this. It regulates your glucose uptake and utilization. It is essential for maintaining blood sugar. Muscle tissue is required in adequate amounts for insulin to work right. If you don't have enough muscle, you're going to have a lot of fat and you're going to be insulin resistant. I'm going to say that again. If you don't have enough muscle, you're going to end up with a lot of fat and you're going to be insulin resistant. You could say it the other way too. You could say if you have too much body fat, that body fat's going to cause the insulin resistance. You could describe it either way. Getting adequate amounts of muscle, healthy muscle, with their mitochondria is the baseline solution to this metabolic problem. Muscle also influences inflammation, just like fat or body fat creates inflammation in the body, which in turn then creates insulin resistance, because insulin resistance is a disease of inflammation. Muscle reduces inflammation, reducing the stress on the cells in regards to insulin, and makes you more insulin sensitive so that it can, your insulin levels, will work better. If you're inflamed, you're going to be insulin resistant. If you have too much body fat, you're going to be inflamed. That's just kind of how it works. And I don't think you can have healthy, adequate, pristine muscle mass and have a ton of body fat at the same time. I'm sure there's one person in the world that's like that, but it's pretty unusual. So we're talking about mitochondria. I'm just going to get a little 2-second blurb to support the different parts of your body and the different systems that relate to mitochondria. And so, and this is crazy when you think about, look, the highest mitochondrial numbers are in the areas with the most intense energy demands. That's your heart, your skeletal muscle, your nerve or brain. Your liver should be on this list too, but I took it off. The heart muscle cells, 40% of their volume, 40% of their volume is made up of these little things. But we're not talking about your heart today, not because your heart's not important, but because we're talking about, you can't, put on a pound of extra muscle mass on your heart. But on your skeletal muscle, if you go to the gym and you start to work out, of course it's good for your heart, but really we're going to think about this more from a skeletal muscle standpoint versus, the muscle that is your heart. But I don't know, it's just kind of an interesting factoid there. Nerve cells, and then this is really interesting too, and I looked this up. So how many mitochondria do you have on average in a typical cell? Did you know this? In the human egg, there's 100 to 200,000 mitochondria per egg. That's crazy. I didn't know that until this morning. But it makes sense because it's a very energy intense place. Heart muscle, 5,000 to 8,000 mitochondria per cell. But what we're talking about today is skeletal muscle that's going to, on average, have between 1,000 and 3,000 mitochondria per muscle cell. And then if you do the math on how many muscle cells you have and what your muscle mass is and all this kind of stuff, which I did here for you in case you're kind of curious. But it ends up being, bottom line, like 18 to 21 trillion mitochondria that you could add if you can put on a pound of muscle. So you could look at it in the reverse. Every pound of muscle that you're losing as you get older, you're losing like gazillions of trillions of mitochondria. You can't fake this. You can't have not enough muscle mass and think that your insulin levels are going to be okay and that you're going to be able to lose weight. It just look at the math. 1 pound of muscle that you lose means you've lost 21 trillion mitochondria. That's like a lot of mitochondria, okay? Whatever that is, you imagine lining them up end to end. It probably goes to the moon and back 100 times or something like that. So this is really important. This is not like an optional thing. You got to have the muscle mass. And then as we get older, the muscle just declines. How depressing is that? If you're sedentary, you follow this red line. It just drops down like a rock. If you're active, you still lose muscle as you get older, but that's the green line here. You can really slow that down, like dramatically. How? By exercising and being active. Here's like a normal healthy leg at 25 years of age. Here's a skinny, I lost all my muscle leg at age 70. You don't want to be like this, right? You want your muscles to be thick and strong. And then why do we lose muscle? We're right back to the same circular argument. It's chronic inflammation that's causing this problem and different kinds of stress. That's not exactly a shocker. Then how do you build up muscle? There's certain nutrients that you need. These are pretty straightforward, but we're going to test for all of these. Vitamin D, antioxidants like C, calcium, potassium, zinc, boron, and most importantly, amino acids. So as you're wanting to rebuild these systems that we're talking about today, you have to eventually start to grapple with lab-based amino acid treatments and learning how to interpret amino acid testing. Maybe that's not the first thing that you want to do, but eventually you're going to want to figure that out. Because if you're going to build muscle tissue, you need to have all the amino acids present. In the short term, you can do stupid stuff that you don't, I shouldn't have said stupid. You can do easy stuff, sorry, that was a judgment. You can do easy stuff without the labs, like just give somebody a whole ton of glutamine and leucine and just get a powder, like a muscle building powder. But it is kind of dumb to do that because you don't know if they need it or not. So, it's better if you do the testing and not just like give somebody muscle building powder because you think that's going to work. Because you could be wrong. You could be giving them the wrong amino acids and not know it. And you can measure all the branched chain amino acids. You can measure tryptophan and glutamine and see if it's low, any of those are low, then you want to support them, or what you're going to try to do is not going to work. So in other words, if you give somebody a muscle building powder, some amino acids or protein powder type thing, and it doesn't have enough, I don't know, arginine in it, something like that, because usually they don't put that much arginine in them, and that person happens to be really low in arginine, it's not going to work because you need all 20 of the amino acids to build muscle. Now, there's some that are extra important, like leucine, and that's the no-brainer kind of stuff. You don't need a lab test to know that it takes 2.5 grams of leucine to trigger muscle growth. But what we need the lab to know is the little nuances of what other amino acids are going to complement that whole process, and make sure that you get that part right. So what we're trying to do here, if you want to look at it from the highest level view, is make people anabolic so that they're building up and really reduce the level of time that they're catabolic when they're breaking things down. So if you're stressed and you're catabolic, you're going to be breaking down tissues, including muscle tissue. That's bad. We don't want that. We want you to be anabolic where you're building up and getting stronger, not the opposite. And so this is why the adrenals are important. We have to think about that, catabolic versus anabolic functions, okay? And we talked about that already. Treatment-wise, you're going to do the testing because that's the whole point of functional medicine, is to do the labs. But you should also know that there are branched chain amino acids that are especially important for building muscle. And so if you do an this is usually how we do it in class. If you do an amino acid test and you see they're low in arginine and citrulline and they're low in, I don't know, phenylalanine or something like that, you can give those amino acids separately and then give the ones that are required for muscle building on top of it. But if you give the ones that are required for muscle building alone, and they're low in arginine and citrulline and phenylalanine, it's not going to work very well, because you're stimulating growth of muscle tissue, but you're not having, based on the testing, the right number of amino acids to build that muscle. So it's an integration between what we know from the non-lab-based stuff, like using branched chain amino acids and leucine to stimulate muscle growth, and the lab-based programs that allow you to personalize or individualize this protocol so that it gets dialed in exactly right, okay? Super important to do. Now, let's see here. Sorry, I'm assuming you guys can hear me, otherwise people would be complaining, but a couple people can't hear. I'm not sure what's going on out there. I'm just gonna keep rolling. So from a functional medicine perspective, we just want people to test. That's, it's as basic as that. Treatment exercises, I'm gonna skip through some of this stuff because I wanna get through the labs. Metabolic, and we talked about this already. Supplements, pretty straightforward. We're gonna get into supplements in a minute too in more detail. So let's talk a little bit about some of the pathways, and then we're gonna look at the testing. So we want to look at fat burning and fat production in human bodies, pretty much that simple. And fat burning is also known as beta oxidation. Fat burning is also called beta oxidation, or sometimes you'll see it written up as fatty acid oxidation. So an absolute requirement for you who want to do functional medicine is to become an expert at testing for and an expert at correcting beta oxidation problems. And if you don't know how to do that, then you should take our mentorship program, because if you don't know how to do that, you're pretty far behind and you need to get caught up. So I'll use that as a segue to talk about the mentorship for a moment, and then we'll go back to the regular program stuff. So we have a mentorship class starting January the 12th. It's $2,700 discount. Why? Because woohoo, it's our 20-year anniversary. And I was like, let's just give them a big discount because I'm pretty happy I made it these 20 years. In the class, you learn how to read the lab reports, you build your confidence, you understand what each lab marker means. And as I said earlier, you start to be able to say, hey, wait a minute, that lab marker means that, but that one over there means this. I'm going to put these things together and apply it to this specific patient. You learn how to sequence programs. This comes up every single day. We talked about this for like a half an hour this morning in class. Patient has liver detoxification problems and environmental toxins, but do I just do that first, or do I have to fix the gut first? And I'm like, well, I don't know. This patient has a really big gallbladder problem. I think this is going to go badly if you do the detox first, and you got to fix the gut, get the gallbladder working well, get the gut and small intestine, large intestine, and gallbladder working. Then you could do detoxification. So sequencing, multifaceted programs, juggling hormones with metabolic health, with neurotransmitter support, all the different GI programs, whether you're, I mean, even like this, every week somebody will ask me, this patient has H. pylori and a parasite, which one do I do first? I mean, that comes up every single week. If you're in the mentorship, you would know the answer to that. You'd be like, boom, got it. And there's a reason why we do things in certain sequences. It's not like my personal opinion. It's because this is what works the best. This is the consensus of the people that have been doing this for a long time that trained me, and have seen the same results in my own practice as well. So you need to gain confidence in designing protocols and doing a protocol that you pretty much are sure is going to work, and that if it doesn't work, you come to class and you say, I don't know, I did this protocol and it didn't work. What do you think is going on? And we problem solve it together as a group. We have a community of people to help you do this. If you're trying to do a functional medicine practice on your own and teach yourself this, and you're trying to teach yourself by calling the lab company and having the lab company tell you what to do, that is crazy town. That is not the way that you learn how to do medicine. If I went to see my cardiologist and she said, I got your lab in, and just give me 5 minutes because I'm going to call Quest to ask them what it means, I would walk out of that cardiologist's office and think, she's learning how to do lab interpretation from the lab company. Like, didn't she go to school for that? The lab companies provide great services, but they're not able to interact with you and tell you the real dosages of stuff. And they're not able either to cross-reference things. What if you do like a GI map from one lab company and a NutriVal from different lab company, and then a Dutch test from a different company? The Dutch people aren't going to tell you about the NutriVal, and the NutriVal people aren't going to tell you about the Dutch, and the GI map people aren't going to tell you about, you know what I mean? And you're off pretty much every time in any patient workup, you're doing multiple labs from multiple lab companies. And so it's even more confusing. In these complex cases, there's no way you can put it together. You can learn individual things from the lab companies, but you can't put together and manage a complex case that way. And nor would you expect anybody to do it that way. If you think about normal, regular doctors that aren't doing functional medicine, you would never go to see like a specialist anywhere and then have, be waiting for them to call 3 different lab companies to get ideas about how they might manage your case. That's just not how it's supposed to work, okay? It's not. So what else do we have in the mentorship? Resource library, we have case studies, hundreds of them. It's a year-long program. We have weekly calls. We have the best faculty on the planet, and it's a really great class. If you guys are interested in really learning how to do this, then you can sign up now and get the big discount. Okay, so let's get back to regularly scheduled programming. Talked about this, fat burning or beta oxidation. This is what we're after. And we want to link this to the citric acid cycle. Now, obviously, if you're not burning fat well, you're going to have weight loss resistance. I probably should have said that earlier. Also, fat production. If you're making a lot of fat in your body, we call fat production fatty acid synthesis. But if you're making a lot of fat in your body, then you're going to be fat, okay? If you're not, it can work either way, or you can have both problems. So you could either not be burning fat very well, that's a beta oxidation problem. That means wherever that fat has come from, you're not burning it very well. Or you could be making a lot of fat in your liver. Most of the fat in your body is made in your liver, by your liver. Most of the fat in your body is made by you consuming carbohydrates and converting those carbohydrates, if they're in excess, into fat. So you don't want to make extra body fat. You want to shut down that process. And how do you deal with that? Well, it's a carbohydrate problem. And then you want to burn the fat that you do have. That's a beta oxidation problem. So we're going to talk now about beta oxidation. And on the fat production side, we're going to link fatty acid synthesis to this other process called glycolysis, which is also tied into insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. So if you're insulin resistant, you don't handle carbs well, what happens to those carbs? They don't just go away, they get turned into fat. And the more body fat that you have, the more inflamed you are and the more insulin resistant you become. So it becomes this self-fulfilling thing, and on we go. So I just have this personal thing about acetyl-CoA metabolism because no one ever talks about it. It's really important, but that's really kind of a personal problem on my side. But we just try to talk about it in relevance to today's talk. So here we have glucose. We convert it to pyruvate. It goes to acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA is like so important, and if you haven't thought a lot about it recently since school or something, look it up just as a favor to me later on today and watch a few videos about it or read some biochemistry about it because it's really important. So acetyl-CoA, from acetyl-CoA then, this is where we get it look at this. It goes into fatty acids. Acetyl-CoA gets converted into fatty acids, and fatty acids get converted into acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA is also how we make cholesterol, all the steroid hormones, and oops, acetyl-CoA is the whole thing that we are controlling for when we're trying to get the mitochondria to work properly. Okay, so acetyl-CoA is the central player in all of this. Things are either going to acetyl-CoA, like glucose to pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, or fatty acids to acetyl-CoA, or acetyl-CoA is going to other things. So, and I mentioned this already, but I'll show it explicitly. Glucose converting to pyruvic acid is called glycolysis, and then that pyruvate ends up as acetyl-CoA, and we burn it up in the energy furnace we call the mitochondria. You can take that glucose, convert it to acetyl-CoA. If there's too much energy in your body at the moment and there's nowhere for this stuff to go, then you're going to convert it into fatty acids or fat. In a good situation where you're burning fat well, you're going to take fatty acids, turn them into acetyl-CoA, and make energy out of them. The energy is down here. So acetyl-CoA is kind of like the centerpiece. Things are going in and out of acetyl-CoA. Beta oxidation is the mechanism by which we burn fat, and when you're at rest, like I am right now, just sitting here, it's 80, well, depending on who you read, 60, 70, 80, 90% of the energy that you're generating is coming from fat burning. You have to have this system running, if for no other reason than to keep your heart beating. It would be a very bad thing if I was sitting here and I couldn't do beta oxidation and I couldn't get energy for my heart cells to beat. Then I would be dead. And that would be sad, and you would have to go and listen to a different webinar. So this is like not like a peripheral thing. It's very central, very central. Fatty acid synthesis is the process by which we make fat. Your body makes fat. Most of the fat in your body, like 2/3 of it, is made by you. You're making it. Okay, you're making it, and where? In your liver. In your liver. Excess carbs, like sugar, are going to make your liver make too much fat. Too much fat. Lipids are super important. Lipids are super important. The other thing about lipids I should just mention is it's not only fatty acids and energy and stuff, but also cell membranes are pretty important as well. Okay, so let's look at beta oxidation. Here's the process. And when you understand the process and we look at the labs, you're going to go, oh, now I understand the lab. You take palmitate, also known as palmitic acid. That's the main fat. It's in the cytosol, the cell. And that fatty acid here, you have to get past this first membrane past the second membrane and into the inner part of the mitochondria. So remember about the mitochondria, it's got this inner membrane and outer membrane, which are made of fat. And this is a fat. So it doesn't just like mush right through there. It can't. You have to yank it through. And how do you do that? Well, there's this thing called carnitine. And carnitine grabs that palmitic acid and it rams it through the first membrane, slips through. It's like one of those slippery slide things, you know, you go to like a summer park slippery slide. It kind of slides through this translocase protein, and then boom, the carnitine delivers that fatty acid inside the mitochondria, where you start to break that fat down into what? Acetyl-CoA. And then the acetyl-CoA goes into the mitochondria. So if this complex, awkward, and difficult to run system gets screwed up, you're in some serious trouble. And it's not the easiest thing in your body to pull off because there's a lot of different steps. There's a lot of different enzymes involved. There's a lot of places where things can break down and not work that well. One important feature of why this happens and why carnitine is so important is because the palmitic acid, it can't get through here because it's the fat trying to go through a fat, right? So that just doesn't work. And it's molecularly too large a structure. Your body converts it into this thing called palmitoyl-CoA. And then that is huge. You see how big palmitoyl-CoA is? But what your body then does, and this is so insane that this even works, is it cleaves off the CoA part, it crams on a carnitine, and that makes it the right size to get through all these membranes. It's a lot of extra work. All these biochemical steps are a lot of extra work. And here's the size challenge. This is so fascinating. This is why carnitine has to be there. This is the palmitoyl-CoA. Look, it's this massive honking thing here. Can't get through. So your body takes that CoA part off, crams on a carnitine. See how teeny tiny that is? And then that gets through, no problem. Boom. You've got fat going into the body, into the mitochondria for energy production. So weight loss resistance, if it's related to not burning fat, means there's a problem with this system that we're looking at here. There could be other problems, but this is a major intersection of problems. There's other reasons why you wouldn't burn fat well, but this is the main one that people miss all the time. If your body fat issue, your weight loss resistance is because you're making too much fat, then we're back to this problem here of too much glucose leading to too much acetyl-CoA, meaning you're making too much fat. So it could be a fat burning problem. You're not burning it fast enough or well enough properly. Beta oxidation is messed up. Or it could be a fat production problem. You're making too much of it. And again, that's called fatty acid synthesis. It's how you make fat. So glycolysis, here, this section here is glycolysis. But I'm trying to trick you and make you think, wait a minute, it's glycolysis, but we're talking about fats? Yeah, because it's the glucose in excess that triggers your body to make the fat. And here we go, right? One more time. Fatty acid synthase, a crucial enzyme that synthesizes, it makes long-chain fatty acids from what? From simpler molecules. De novo lipogenesis is the name for it, right? De novo lipogenesis. So you're creating fatty acids like palmitic acid or palmitate from what? From acetyl-CoA. Okay, it's just what we just looked at a second ago. This is the way that you store excess energy. And here's the process by which you're making fat. So, and there's a lot of other things going on here, but you're basically, this is a liver cell. And what they're showing here is that obviously you also have fat in your body that you ate. I don't know, what would you eat? Some French fries or potato chips or some olive oil or, you know, a hazelnut or whatever that has fat in it. So obviously you're also getting fat into your bloodstream from food that you're eating. We're not overly concerned about that at the moment. Of course, you should be on a diet with the right amount of fat and the right kinds of fat. But what's tripping out most people is the carbohydrate part of all this. And if you're eating too many carbohydrates, then you're going to force the liver to make all these fatty acids. And then you're going to get a fatty liver, among other things. So on the input side, the glycolysis bringing energy in, we're thinking about lactate and pyruvate. We're going to see these markers on the test in a moment. That's going to be determining glycolysis. And there's something called the pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, which is how we convert pyruvate to acetyl-CoA. This is actually what we're measuring. So when you see high pyruvic acid on a lab test, pyruvate or pyruvic acid is high, it means this enzyme complex isn't working well. And this would be the first warning sign of insulin resistance. The first warning sign of insulin resistance is pyruvate not converting to acetyl-CoA. That's the first sign. How do you see that? High pyruvate on an organic acids test. That may show up long before other markers of insulin resistance, like elevated hemoglobin A1C or elevated glucose or high triglycerides, other stuff like that. So sometimes the organic acids will pick it up in the early phase. What it means when pyruvate is high is that this pyruvate dehydrogenase complex isn't working well, and we want to get it re-engaged properly. So that's pretty darn important too. And here's another example. We'll look at a few more diagrams, then we're going to look at labs. So you have glucose converting to pyruvate, and then down to acetyl-CoA into the citric acid cycle where we make energy. If there's a block right here, then pyruvate goes high. And you can see the enzyme right here, pyruvate dehydrogenase. That's the one that we're thinking about. Okay, let me just show you a couple other diagrams that'll set you up so when we look at the labs, it'll make a little more sense. Here we go. This is the summary of all of this stuff. So we take fat through beta oxidation, we turn it into acetyl-CoA. Carnitine is the nutrient that does that. And there are all these markers here you can see that will go high if this isn't working well. Adipate, suberate, ethylmalonate, that's beta oxidation. Glycolysis is right here. We take carbs, we convert them, carbs are glucose, we break the 6-carbon glucose down into 2 3-carbon pyruvates, and then that pyruvate goes into acetyl-CoA, and whether the acetyl-CoA comes from fat or carb, doesn't matter, we make energy out of it with a citric acid cycle. I mean, there's some pretty big differences. For every molecule of glucose, you get somewhere between 32 and 34, maybe 36 ATP. For every molecule of a fatty acid, you get like 100, 104 ATP. So there's some pretty big differences, and obviously fat is burned a lot more slowly. Glucose is burned really fast. If you need to leave right now, let's say you're watching this webinar, and all of a sudden the earth starts shaking. I grew up in San Francisco area, so I'm used to this earthquake. And you're thinking, wow, there's an earthquake happening. I'm going to run out of this building because I don't want to get crushed. You're not going to be running out of the building down the block using fat. That's going to be pretty much glucose mediated for fast energy. However, if you're strolling down a forested lane and you're walking slowly and taking deep breaths because you're enjoying nature, you're going to be primarily burning fats. So fats are much slower to oxidize, glucose super fast. And if you're sprinting, you're going to be using a lot of glucose. If you're strolling along, you're going to be burning more fat. And this is important too when you're designing lifestyle programs. If you see a patient that has a glycolysis problem, you want to engage their ability to burn energy quickly. So you want them to do really high intensity exercise as a complement to get their glycolysis to work well. If you have a patient that's got a really big problem with beta oxidation and not burning fat, you want them to work on their zone 2 exercise, because that's when we get more efficient and better at burning fat. So you can even, as you're designing the lifestyle component of the program, you can look at the labs and say, hey, I really want you to work on your zone 2 exercise, because we want to, and we're going to give you some carnitine because we want to get this fat burning block to your weight loss working right. Now, if they have a glycolysis issue and they're making too much fat, remember, too many carbs, you make too much fat, maybe their pyruvic acid is high or pyruvate is high, you want them to do high intensity exercise, get better at glycolysis, and of course, limit their sugar and carbohydrate intake at the same time. So you can control for diet and exercise programs and coordinate them with the labs. That can be really effective. Here's that pyruvate dehydrogenase enzyme. This is a little better image. That other one was kind of small. So pyruvate converts into acetyl-CoA. This big old enzyme does that, and it's made up of thiamine, that's B1, lipoic acid, pantothenic acid, or B5, B2, and B3. If you don't have all these B vitamins, this whole thing's going to fall apart. That's a problem. And one last thing before we look at labs is, I don't know what the easiest way to show this to you is. Let's just go back to this one here. You just have to imagine this a little bit. So this is the, a zoom in kind of biochemical view of the mitochondria and how they work. What we're worried about damaging this whole system would be environmental toxins. Heavy metals and chemicals are going to damage these different enzyme systems here. Okay, and when that happens, you're going to see that these markers go high. So if you have an environmental toxin that damages the succinate dehydrogenase enzyme, succinic acid or succinate is going to go high. And oh, that enzyme's messed up. I wonder why. It could be an environmental toxin, it could be a genetic issue, it could be a lot of things. But one of the main things that's going to damage these enzymes and make it so you can't make energy is going to be environmental toxins. And you can see, based on organic acids testing, exactly which enzyme is screwed up. Sometimes that even tells you what kind of a toxin it is, but not always. All right, so let's look at some labs and design some programs here. And then we'll do questions. You guys are welcome to ask questions as well. Let's look at some labs first. So this is a lab from Diagnostic Solutions. It is their OAP, which stands for Organic Acids Profile. And we're going to look at some of these markers here. And maybe I'll show you some diagrams too that relate to this. So let's start off. Let's start off with fat burning because we talked a lot about that. So on the second page, you can see fatty acid oxidation. That could also be called beta oxidation. This is your body's capacity to burn fat in the mitochondria. Remember, we saw the carnitine grabbing it and pulling it in? Ethylmalonic acid. I want to say adipate because it's usually, I'm used to saying adipate. Adipic acid or adipate, subbaric acid or subarate. These are the markers that when they go high mean there's a problem with beta oxidation. This person doesn't have that problem. But if the fatty acid markers are high, there's a fat burning problem. Now we go back up to here. And under glycolysis, which stands for glycolysis, as I said, right? So glycolysis, the two main markers we're concerned about are going to be pyruvic acid, which we just talked about, and they even tell you the name of the enzyme. You see that right there? Pyruvate dehydrogenase. That's the enzyme that we just looked at. There's the nutrients that we just looked at, B1, B2, B3, B5, lipoic acid, and also lactic acid. So, but we're talking mostly about pyruvic acid today. If pyruvic acid is high, it means there's a metabolic block with glycolysis. So you're not getting your carbs into energy production pathways. So what do you think is going to happen to those carbs? They're just going to leave your body on their own. Know that if that was the case, then we could all be eating ice cream all day long and never get fat. Okay, when pyruvic acid goes high and that glycolysis process gets interrupted, those carbs look around for something to do. And your liver is over here going, hey, I'll deal with this one more time. I'll take all those extra carbs that you just ate that you didn't really need. And I'm going to do something with them, but I can't really store them as carbs because your glycogen stores are already pretty full. So what am I going to do with them? I don't know. I'll turn them into fat. How's that? And I'll stick them on your butt or in your gut or wherever, we accumulate fat. Okay, so glycolysis getting screwed up can cause stubborn fat gain because you're making fat, and beta oxidation being screwed up can cause fat burning problems. So that's kind of the thrust of what we want to look at. Now, this person doesn't have either of those problems, which is fine, but this person has another problem, which is why I actually pulled this lab, is now we're looking at, okay, they can get glucose burned up. They're not doing so bad at that. It's not perfect, but it's not super bad. They can get fat burned well, but what happens once they're in the Krebs cycle? Do those markers all look like they're good? No, not really at all. In fact, there's a bunch of them that are low. So citric acid, isocitric acid, and succinic acid and malic acid are all low. So let's go back to the diagram and I'll show you. So this person can burn fat and they can burn carbs, but then they're having a pretty big breakdown. Zing, zing, zing. Here. So this person is burning fat and getting it to acetyl-CoA, and they're burning carbs and getting it to acetyl-CoA. If pyruvic acid was high, there'd be a problem with carbs. If adipate, sucrate, or ethyl malonate were high, there'd be a problem with fat. But both of those are working okay. They're getting the acetyl-CoA they need. And then what's happening? The citric acid cycle itself isn't working. We just saw citrate or citric acid was high, isocitrate was high, and succinate was high. That means there's 3 enzymes in the citric acid cycle that aren't working right. So you got all this work to get your acetyl-CoA figured out, and then the citric acid cycle is kaput. Why would that happen? Environmental toxins damaging these enzymes. If this person is eating perfectly, even if they're exercising right, what's going to happen? I don't know. It's not going to work because their mitochondria are broken. Can't get a broken mitochondrial system to burn energy properly. So you end up fat, tired, maybe depressed. Remember, where are the mitochondria located? Well, there's apparently a couple 100,000 of them in your eggs if you're female. So that might be a fertility problem. They're in your heart. You could have a cardiovascular problem. They're in high concentrations in your brain. So you could have a cognitive problem with depression or memory or anxiety, something like that. It's all the high energy components of the body. And then how can we correct this with lifestyle? Well, you can use what we started the whole lecture with, strength training, right? And cardiovascular training, cardiorespiratory fitness. Basically, doing strength training and cardio exercise to build the mitochondria. That is like a key component to all of this. That's why I started with that. Why? Because you want to get that extra 20 trillion mitochondria per pound of muscle on your body by working out, and both cardiovascular exercise that'll help with certain aspects of this, as well as strength training, both. Let's see here. And I'm going to just design one program, and then you guys can ask questions if you want. But I'm going to show you, because I think I pulled these 2 labs that are kind of similar. So let me just show you the other one, just in case you're a Genova person. So this is a Genova lab, a metabolomics from Genova. And when you look at it, you can go to the same section here. And this one's kind of nice because they have the lab markers superimposed on the pathways. So for this patient, fatty acid metabolism is, yes, working fine. Hang on a second, I need my glasses. Why? Because I'm 61 years old and I can't see without my glasses. Pyruvic acid, though, is high. We talked about this a lot. This is the beginning of insulin resistance. Pyruvic acid is high. That's the beginning of insulin resistance. And then within the citric acid cycle itself, there's a bunch that are off. So now we're getting a little suspicious, like something's going on here. Fat burning, okay. Carb burning, not so great. Citric acid cycle, not so great. We can go down to the actual section here that's a little more detailed. These are the same lab markers, but they're just reflected in a more detailed way. And we'll show you, like, this is the secret of this whole webinar. If you made it this far, congratulations, because this is like the most important part. So stop texting your friends and pay attention for a minute here. Cellular energy and mitochondrial markers. You see that? Fatty acid metabolism is in good shape. We're happy about that. Pyruvic acid is on the high side. That's not good. That's the beginning of insulin resistance. And what's happening under energy metabolism? You see how they're all clustered in the mid-range or low? That's what Dr. Richard Lord calls a hypometabolic state. So Usually with organic acids, what you'll see if there's a problem is these markers go high. That means that the enzyme's broken and things are building up. It's just like if there's an accident on the freeway and then the fire trucks come and the ambulance comes, it's blocked. And so what happens? Traffic builds up. So if an enzyme is blocked and things aren't flowing through it very well, you're going to see high levels here. So what does it mean if these markers are mostly low? I'm going to pause there and see who knows the answer to that. Is that a bad thing or is that a good thing? Anybody know? Think about it. If the markers are high, the enzymes are busted up. If it's low, yes, thank you. And it's all mentorship graduates that are answering the question correctly. Thank you for answering it correctly, those of you who did. It's insufficient numbers of mitochondria. Insufficient numbers of mitochondria. Not enough mitochondria. That's the whole thing that we're talking about now. They can either get damaged, the mitochondria, or you can have not enough of them. How do you get more of them? Exercise. Amino acid testing, building mitochondria. So now we need to build mitochondria for this patient, and we need to stop this early warning sign of insulin resistance from happening. So let's do those two things in the next 3 minutes in a supplement program. Now, if you were in the mentorship class, which actually some of you are, you would know, you would be looking up these lectures. Okay, and then you would be figuring out what the lab means, writing up a program, submitting that to class. Then you'd be reviewing the test in class with your colleagues and teachers in the mentorship, getting feedback on it, what's going to work, what doesn't work, what's the sequence we should do here. So for those of you that really want to learn how to do the work, we have the mentorship starting next week. We have this massive $2,700 discount because it's our 20th year anniversary, which I'm pretty excited about. Feels like an accomplishment. I made it this long, to be honest. You enter that code, you scan that QR code, you get the discount, and we will turn you in the next year into the most badass lab interpretation person in your town, okay? And I will put you up against any local functional medicine doctor on organic acids, fatty acids, amino acid, adrenal lab testing, Dutch lab testing, GI map lab testing, Nutrival, metabolomics, all that stuff. By the end of the year, you're just going to be like masterful and superior to all other people out there. Why is that? Because most people don't spend a year of their life studying how to interpret these labs. Why is that? I don't know. It's ridiculous. Okay, so we now want to fix this hypometabolic state, not enough mitochondria. And let's do that. And this is a program you're going to use frequently in your practice. So this would be pyruvate high, and then hypometabolic mitochondria. Sometimes it's also called mitochondrial retraction. Obviously, this is going to involve your thyroid. We don't really have time to talk about that, but obviously you got to check the thyroid if this is happening. Just want to mention that. There's no way you can think about it. If you don't have enough what does the thyroid do in the first place? What's the whole point of thyroid hormones? Is they control your basal metabolic rate. And they do that through two different means. The thyroid hormones in the short term just squirt out there and manipulate these mitochondrial enzymes that we're talking about. These ones right here, these are controlled by your thyroid. That's what's, when you say the thyroid regulates basal metabolic rate, it's because the thyroid's controlling these mitochondrial enzymes. And then over the long term, it changes the genetic expression of these enzymes. So thyroid hormone is intimately involved in this. And imagine what would happen if there's not enough mitochondria present. What's your thyroid going to do? It's not going to work very well. So anyways, that's an important component of this I didn't want to forget. So you got to check thyroid. So you use free-form amino acids in a powder, and we'll do 2 teaspoons, 1 or 2 times a day. And it's got to be on an empty stomach or it won't work. Sometimes amino acids are better with food for certain purposes, but in this case, no. You need to use CoQ10. Usually it comes in 100 milligram. And you want to load people up on a fair amount of it, like at least 400 a day. Magnesium, I like the glycinate form, although you could use any kind you want. Even though this person tested fine on carnitine, we're still going to give them a little carnitine. It comes in at 340 milligram. Got to have B complex, the right kind of B complex, the whole methylated blah, 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 right? And some kind of a multi-pack to get all the little vitamins and minerals and stuff in there. So this, oh, and then if you really want to go for it, this is kind of expensive, but it's worth doing if you can, the patient has the money, is PQQ. That's specifically for mitochondrial biogenesis. There's a newer one too that's out now. Everyone's using urolithin A or whatever, but I like the PQQ. So this would be a program done for 3 to 6 months to stimulate mitochondrial growth, Now I'm going to show you 1 or 2 other programs. We have 1 or 2 minutes left. So let's say that they had a beta oxidation problem. Okay, we looked at that. Adipate, suberate, ethylmalonate, one of those markers is high. They can't do beta oxidation. Then you're going to use carnitine, just plain old L-carnitine. One I use comes in at 340 milligram. I don't know why. Let's just call it 500. That's the math is so much easier. 500 milligram. And you need like 2,500 a day, 2,000 a day. So I would say something like 2, 1, 2, something like that for the carnitine. And then you have to have B complex or it won't work. That's enough to get beta oxidation going. It's really simple. Carnitine and some B complex, especially B2. Now, if they had high pyruvate, okay, high pyruvate, that's the glycolysis problem. We already saw what the supplements are, but I'll just list it out so you can see. Remember, it was lipoic acid. Usually that comes in at 300 milligram. And you can do anywhere from 1 to 2 of those twice a day. And then B complex, remember all the B's involved, so you want to do B complex, either 1 or 2 a day. And then typically when you're working with blood sugar, you do some combination product for blood sugar support. I use this one called Dioxanol from Ortho. There's also Metabolic Extra from Pure. Every company will have a blood sugar combination sort of blood sugar support product. Okay, but the important components are lipoic acid, B complex, plus whatever else you want to add. And all the combination products are similar. They're gonna have chromium and maybe some, they have to have biotin in them, maybe some gymnema or cinnamon, you know, some combination product that's gonna help support their blood sugar as well. Okay, so that's 3 different quick programs there. 1 for beta oxidation, 1 for high pyruvate, and then 1 if the mitochondria are broken, there's not enough of them present. If you were in the mentorship, you'd be learning this stuff, you'd be having your own cases, and you'd be submitting them and getting up to speed. And believe me, after a year of doing this, like all throughout the week and listening to hours and hours of these calls and sending in your own cases, people learn how to do this. It's pretty amazing to watch. It's very exciting for me to see this whole process unfold and to watch people going from really not even knowing what, like in the beginning, first week, not knowing what test to order, you know, like they're saying, which lab to order from which company? And at the end of the year, on the exit interview, when I'm talking to people, they're like, well, yeah, I just did this and this and that, and I did a hypometabolic with this person at the age of this and that, and they're all better. And, you know, the stuff really works. We can get you trained and get you competent in lab interpretation and in the thinking process and in the patient communication processes. Like in this morning's mentorship call, there's at least twice where I go off on these tangents, you know, and it seemed like a tangent, but I was really trying to explain how I would explain this lab situation to a patient. And the doctor totally got it, because at the end of that, what seemed like a rambling thing that I said, she was like, oh, that's exactly what I want to tell the patient tomorrow. I'm like, yes. I didn't tell the patient this. I just said what I said, and then she totally got it. I'm like, ooh, she got it. So now she can walk in the room tomorrow morning. She's just going to repeat exactly what I just told her. And it's like, gosh, that's done. You know, you don't have to stress about it. Because in those early years of learning how to do this work, like, it's hard enough to understand what the lab markers mean, let alone how to explain it to patients, right? You need someone to coach you on that on a regular basis. And that's really the purpose of the mentorship. Okay, so I'm going to get to questions. We're over time now. I totally get it. Most of you probably have to leave, but there are sending questions. I'll spend an extra minute or two here. So from Vera, how many markers need to be low in the Krebs cycle to be considered a hypometabolic state? That's complicated. I can't really answer that simply, but it needs to be a clear pattern of all markers, either mid-range or low, and then typically none of the markers high, but there's some exceptions to that. And then you can also see hypometabolic states reflected in things like low omega-3 fatty acids, low neurotransmitter levels. And here's something for you. In a hypometabolic state, this is a quiz question, this is a hard one. In a hypometabolic state, what would you expect to see on the oxidative stress markers to confirm that hypometabolic state? Where would the oxidative stress markers be? Would they be super high or super low? They'd be low. Okay, why? Because there's not enough mitochondria, and the main source of oxidative stress in the human body comes from mitochondria. So that's very deceptive. You can have a hypometabolic state and their oxidative stress levels look really low because they don't have enough mitochondria to make the oxidative stress happen. What times does the mentorship happen? So the live calls are on Tuesdays at 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Pacific time. And the live calls are also on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So we have 3 live call times, okay? Yes, we're going to have this recorded, and thank you for being here. We have another session coming up because this is a series after all, so check your email, and we're going to be getting into glutathione and methylation and how that applies to everything we talked about today. We're going to cover that in the next session. Okay, I hope to see some of you on that session, and I hope to see others of you in the mentorship next week. Take care. Bye now.